Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Working on the Dad Pod. I am Ethan, and as always, is my co-host Alex. Let's get to work. Alex, how you doing?
I am doing well. It is, well, I should say I'm doing okay. It is
Yeah,
the night of the NBA draft. Your
that's
Lakers
right.
have just selected with the 17th pick, but my Hornets had
Mm,
I live in Florida, as everybody who's listened to this podcast probably knows, but I am from North Carolina originally, so I'm a
mhm.
Hornets fan.
Yep. And
Um,
as a refresher, as Alex mentioned, my Lakers just picked, but I live in the DC area, and Alex and I actually met at the University of Miami. I am wearing our Miami shirt, trying to bring some good luck to our boys Isaiah Wong and Jordan Miller.
yeah,
Hopefully, they
absolutely.
both get drafted tonight and take our Final Four season into the NBA.
Yeah.
So back to you and the Horn Dogs.
The Hornets,
Right,
they had
right.
the second overall pick. This is going to be old news by the time you listen to this. We're not breaking anything, but they took Brandon Miller from
Hmm.
Alabama. Interesting pick. I would have gone
Yeah,
Scoot Henderson. I think he is the guy. I am firmly of the belief, being a longtime Hornets Bobcats fan, right? I won't say the lifetime, because there was
hmm,
actually a period of time where I was a Lakers fan because there wasn't a Charlotte franchise.
that's true. Yeah.
But other than that, I just feel like they consistently mess up top picks. And so I've been convinced for a long time that whether it was Scoot Henderson or Brandon Miller, whoever they didn't pick, whoever went third, was going to be the better player. So I thought Scoot would be the better player coming into the draft, and now I'm convinced he will be because he
Hmm.
didn't get selected. But they got Brandon Miller, who, I watched him play in college, watched him play in the NCAA tournament. The guy's athletic. He can shoot. He can do a lot of things on the court, off the court. He
Yeah.
can do a lot of things too. So that'll be
Yeah.
interesting. I think we were talking a little bit before this. I think the book is pretty closed on the the murder that happened at the University of
Yeah.
Alabama, and I'm
Yeah.
not really here to speculate on who should be charged or what charges
Sure.
or what justice should look like for that, because
Yeah.
frankly I am pretty uninformed on the issue intentionally.
Sure.
Um,
So all I wanted to say on that is like the Hornets had a choice between essentially two players. There was Scoot Henderson, who everybody else seemed to think was the second best, and from everything I read, was a lot more of a sexy piece in any potential trades that the
mhm,
Hornets could have done. He was much
right.
more attractive to other teams.
Yeah.
So it's also just kind of like, you know, like I'm not going to say whether or not, you know, uh, the judgment passed on Brandon Miller is correct or incorrect. But you basically had a choice between the guy everyone else thinks is good, who didn't potentially supply a murder weapon, a gun, or the
Yeah.
guy you're the only one who thinks is good and might have given a gun to a friend to kill somebody. You know what I mean? It's just
Yeah.
like I'm. Um, you and I not only are friends from college, but we're also both have public relations experience in our jobs, in what we do. So just like from a PR standpoint, I feel like Scoot Henderson was 100% the way to go. But
I,
that's
I
just me.
I think that from a PR perspective, the Brandon Miller off court issues is
Hmm.
probably, I didn't see it in a lot of the pre draft coverage, right? I
True,
didn't see
true.
that.
It
I
was
think
that
that
was like Jalen Carter from Georgia in the NFL draft. That
now,
was a lot more
granted,
prevalent.
right, but it was a lot more, it was a lot closer to the draft, right?
True, true, true,
It was a
true.
lot closer to the
Yeah.
draft. A lot of new information came out. And I think, as you know, with news cycles, when new information comes out, it brings things back to the forefront. And if
Hmm.
something comes out in that murder case, I am always, I always have been team let justice be served, even if it's a detriment to my team. It is even easier to say that when my team in this specific scenario is a garbage franchise
True,
just
true.
just on the win loss column, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I don't trust them to do anything. Jordan is selling the team, but like as much as whether he's the greatest of all time in your opinion, he's the second greatest, he's top 5, whatever you think, he's
Yeah.
probably on your Mount Rushmore of basketball players. He is whatever the opposite of the Mount Rushmore of owners is. He's down there. He's just ahead of guys like Donald Sterling, right? Who were actually criminal, right?
Yeah.
And
Who was that? Who was that guy that just had to sell the Suns? He was a bad dude
yeah,
too.
yeah.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
he's a step above that, where he's not evil, he's just incompetent.
Yeah.
And so, as much as I grew up loving Michael Jordan, I am not sad to see him leave his majority stake. He's still going to be there. He's still a minority owner. But yeah, it's one of those where when you have lived through a team picking Emeka Okafor and Adam Morrison and Cody Zeller with top 5 picks and Michael Kidd Gilchrist and just like a who's who of guys that never made it with these top 5 selections, or watching Chris Paul go third and then they get Raymond Felton as the consolation prize with the 5th pick. It's been a lot of that, but
and no, I feel you. And obviously historically, the Lakers have had some great first round picks. I would say in the more recent past, the modern era, our bread and butter has tended to be second round picks. Just like I feel like we have a very good scouting department, and we do really well with the second rounders. So the Lakers at number 17 just took Jalen Hood-Schifino. Seems to be that he was a pretty good piece of the Indiana team that the University of Miami, go Canes, beat in the Sweet 16.
Round of 32.
Round of 32. And then the women beat Indiana's women as well, back-to-back days, same weekend. So that was really fun.
Who's your daddy?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Who's your dad? I like it.
Hey, dads. Are you tired of the same evening routine? Dinner, maybe some playtime with toys that get left everywhere, brushing teeth, and then bed? Next time, pull out a Wongo puzzle and do something different that you and the kids will enjoy together. Wongo is the perfect balance of a good challenge without being so hard that you stop talking to each other and leave your family forever. Trust me, once you try Wongo, you'll never go back to a boring old jigsaw puzzle. They're 100% wooden puzzles. They'll last forever. Each piece is hand-drawn, so no 2 pieces are the same, and you'll discover some fun whimsy pieces as you work through it. They come in a custom wooden box, which is perfect for storage and gifting. With stunning designs and unique shapes, Wongo puzzles are a cut above the rest. I'm partial to the animal designs like the sea tortoise and the elephant because my kids get excited about them even more. It was great to pull out a puzzle and be done in a night and not have to have it on the table for a week. Forget about it. Maybe get fruit pieces all over it or something like that. So what are you waiting for? Go to wongopuzzles.com, pick your puzzle today, and be sure to use the promo code WOTDP to get 10% off your order. This is the most fun you've had with a puzzle guaranteed, or your money back. Go to WONGOpuzzles.com and use the code WOTDP to get 10% off your order and get puzzling right now.
Anyway, so Alex, I'm going to propose something to you. I feel like we kind of both talked about wins and losses just like via basketball. So to avoid running super long, should we just get into the show?
Yeah, we can just get into the show because today I don't know, did you mention this earlier, but today we're actually talking about mental health. We jumped straight into because you said, how are you doing? And I was like, I'm fired up because this is the only time that my team makes headlines for anything remotely positive in this arena, right? But mental health is what we're talking about. And as you can tell, mine around NBA basketball is not very great. What is that you want to say? Like, I feel like the NBA, as like sports go, in like my hierarchy of things I care about, like the NBA is really low. Part of that is being a Hornets fan.
Sure,
But I feel like
sure.
we talk about it more than anything. Like we were talking about the NBA playoffs a few episodes back, and it's just the time of the year, right?
Yeah, and
But
just like once we got this podcast off the ground, and
yeah, and
also the
it's
NBA playoffs
obviously
are a really
timing.
long time.
It's right, and
Yeah.
yeah, the playoffs last forever, and obviously it's draft night. But I'm like, man, I talk about the NBA a lot on this show compared to how much I talk about it at all
So
compared to everything. But guys, get ready for college football season because I'm sure Ethan and I will have some
lots of
spicy
highs and
takes.
lows. Yeah. And I'm with you too, Alex. I'm a Lakers and Dodgers fan, but ultimately, like, I don't really care as much about pro sports as I used to. I just love college sports so much more.
Sure.
Even though there's like this new professional element in NIL, like, I don't really care. It's still like there's still school spirit. There's still emotion. There's still imperfections. It's just more fun to watch. And you can't beat March Madness. Like, if in my perfect scenario, the East-West nonsense of conferences, and especially in the NBA, would go away, and the 16 teams that make the playoffs would get seeded 1 to 16. You can still have playoff series, but like it'd be, like, who cares geographically where a team is? Like, I would much rather see some kind of, like, if they could find a way, a perfect mold of the NCAA tournament, but also have playoff series, or there's 30 there's 30 teams in the NBA. So it'd be cool maybe if they did like a full on all 30 teams make a tournament, and then once you get to the final like 16, you get into series. I don't know. Well, I'm brainstorming here.
Yeah, but you could run into some scenarios where a team like the Spurs or the Hornets or one of these atrocious teams just jumps up and catches the Lakers on a bad day in the first round.
Well, like, could you imagine
the NCAA tournament is an atrocious way to find the best team in the nation. Sometimes it does it. Like, I think this year, like, you could easily make the case that UConn was the most talented team in the country, but you have plenty of years where you've got like Butler as like an 8 seed or a 5 seed making the finals, and you're like, they played great. They deserve to be there under the constitution of how everything's constructed. They are probably not one of the best teams in the country.
But it's and that's fine. Like, but we also as a society have done away with best based on like rankings. That's why like we no longer declare football champions just based on the AP poll. I mean, you can make an argument that the English Premier League does it best, where you got the point system, and the others got the most points. But like, just imagine this before we get into for our second attempt to get into mental health. Just imagine this: you have a team like the Spurs who were terrible this year, but they go on a run in this like insane tournament that starts off a single elimination, and then they end up winning 4 series in a row, and you then get you win the NBA championship, and then you got the first round pick. That'd be insane.
You would get the 32nd pick. You would actually
no. In my scenario, whatever you're seeded, 1 through 30, go. We're going down a really bad rabbit hole.
We are way down the rabbit hole because I have so many thoughts that I need to leave on the table of like why that's terrible. But I am looking forward to the draft being over. Last thing I'll say is I'm looking forward to the draft being over and focusing back on baseball, because as a Panthers fan and a Hornets fan who have combined first round pick total of 3 because of being awful this year, I'm actually a Braves fan, and they are phenomenal. Go Braves.
Sure. Anyway. So serious mode. We are talking about mental health, and I'm
how much sports tears your mental health apart. No, we're talking in general. In general, mental health. It's good.
And I'm not going to speak for Alex, but I have a feeling he, like me, is also going to get pretty serious and open and personal about his own mental health journey, like I am. So I want to say that I have been on and off in therapy for a little over 3.5 years. I work for the federal government, and there's a program called the Employee Assistance Program, which is made available to all federal employees. it covers mental health and some other things you may need, at least your first 6 sessions, and then like the insurance you have is supposed to take over from there. But in September of 2019, 2 months away from my first daughter being born, I was definitely on edge and I was losing my temper. It was never anything like I wasn't getting like physical or anything, but my wife eventually just had to say to me, you need to talk to somebody. Talk to somebody because clearly I'm not helping you. So talk to somebody. And so I called the EAP, Employee Assistance Program. Sorry, I couldn't remember if I defined the acronym. But
getting into federal government mode.
Yes, acronyms everywhere. Acronyms. So called the line, and they found me a therapist that was actually walking distance from my house. So I was meeting with him once a week, and then after those first 6 sessions, I wasn't getting billed. Neither was my insurance, so that was kind of cool. And I actually was feeling a lot better going into having a baby. Took a couple weeks off because I wanted to be devoted to the baby. Then COVID happened, and we switched to virtual. And he's old, so then he left the company, and I was like, I thought he was retiring, and I didn't want to buy. Or I didn't want to take the time to like find a new therapist, but then he opened his own business. So I'm back with him, and I'm now down to every 2 weeks. But essentially, for everyone else, Ethan, have been going to virtual therapy for 3.5 years. And you know what? That's okay. And it is something that is not easy to start doing. It is not something, or for me, and it wasn't that I was like against therapy. There was a point where I realized I needed it. And I think for me I wasn't feeling like myself in that I have always had a reputation of just kind of being like friendly and happy and very, very personable. Some people might find me annoying, but they cannot deny that I am like at least approachable.
Magnetic.
Yeah. But I wasn't that person for a while. And, I wanted to be again. And I'd like to think I'm there. Although I will say the pandemic overall has made me rather like just jaded in general. But I think I think I'm back to normal on a pandemic curve. With regard to my approachability. But I do want to say that before I kick it to you to talk about, to brief everybody on your mental health journey, that there's no right time to go to therapy. But what I will say in hindsight is start going to therapy before you need it. Make it a thing. Just like find somebody, formalized or not, virtual or in person, find somebody that you are comfortable talking to, where you've got the time dedicated on your schedule, and you're really just beginning to open up in ways that you're not used to before you need to. And if I could go back and tell my younger self that, I would have told myself the moment I got insurance, being a employee of the federal government, because it's good insurance, I would have started going to therapy long before I needed it, so that I might not have gotten to the point where I did. So I'm going to kick it to you, man.
Yeah. So I don't have that one moment that I think was like, I need therapy, or someone else telling me that I needed to go to therapy. I have had two, I don't want to call them bouts, but 2 periods of my life where I've gone to therapy. The first, when I was young, I was about 5 years old. It was shortly after my parents had gotten divorced. And I don't remember if there was actually, because I'm pretty young, memories are somewhat hazy there, but I don't remember if there was actually something that my parents saw in me where I needed therapy, or if it was just one of those things where they were like, we got divorced, and so we should send him to a family therapist to make sure he's processing it. My parents like split up and got divorced when I was like 3 or 4. So as far as I remember it, there are two possibilities, right? There are two possibilities. Either I was too young to really process it, and then by the time I started processing things, my life was just with two separated parents was just the norm, or the therapy worked really well and I don't remember how. Uh, so those are the two possibilities. But then the second time I started going to therapy was about a year ago, little less than a year ago. Maybe it's 11 months. I don't have the exact date in front of me. But what happened was there wasn't some singular moment, but I think as a result of the pandemic and a lot of dynamics changing in the world, there has been a renewed focus on people going to therapy and taking the stigmas out of therapy. Like, I'm
Yeah.
glad we're having this conversation, but I don't think, thankfully, I don't think we're actually breaking new ground of telling people it's okay to go to therapy.
No.
As much as, say, 5 years ago, it still felt very unmasculine to go to therapy.
Mhm.
It still felt very much like hiding your feelings, keeping it in, solving your own problems was the way to be a strong emotional man in the
Yeah.
traditional masculine sense of everything. And so I think there were some stigmas breaking down, and I was like, I spent a long time saying, okay, do I want to go to therapy? Like, maybe I should. Maybe this is something I should explore. And kind of you were talking about, I was like, I don't know that I want this is a service that I want to pay for.
Yeah.
I have insurance. I'm self-employed, but my wife has employer-sponsored health insurance. It costs me $25 a visit.
Mm-hmm.
It's not bank breaking for what I
Yeah.
get out of it.
Right.
And I'm not saying that for everybody, $25 is nothing. I'm not saying it's
Sure.
even chump change for me or anything like
And
that, but it's worth it. But what was happening for me specifically is I was on social media a lot and I was seeing these things about going to therapy. But what I was also seeing more and more of were specific niche of influencers that were talking about ADHD as a growing number of voices talking about adult ADHD. When we were kids, I don't know if you remember what ADHD was like when we were kids, but it felt like, there were one or two kids in class that were always bouncing off the walls, that were the problem students that couldn't stop talking, this, that, and the other. And that was what, in my mind, ADHD was. So with me, it was, I started seeing all these things of like, this is what it's like having ADHD. And they would start listing off the things. And I'm like, watching it. And it's that sort of like light bulb thing where the first couple things you're like, okay, yeah, but everybody does that.
mm-hmm.
And then they keep going, and you're like, but everybody does that. And then you watch more of this type of content, and you're like, okay, I'm checking way too many boxes here.
Right.
I'm checking the boxes of really struggling to get going on projects sometimes, really struggling to wrap up projects sometimes, really struggling. I'm not super hyperactive. I don't have the H as much manifesting physically in me bouncing off the walls and needing to walk around and needing to move all the time. But I'm sort of like, okay, there are a lot of different things going on here that I'm checking these boxes. So I went, the first thing I did, and it was a bad first move and I regretted it, is I actually went to, because like you, virtual therapy is very convenient, to sit in front of your computer and just chat with someone. I was trying to find what the first step would be in potentially getting diagnosed. And that led me to, through my health insurance portal, to psychiatrists, not psychologists, not therapists, but psychiatrists. And for those of you that maybe off the top of your head don't understand the difference, psychiatrists are the ones that they can do some therapy things, but they are primarily solving things with drugs, prescriptions.
They went to medical school, whereas a
Right.
psychologist probably has like a master's or a PhD.
I think, and I could be wrong, I think a psychologist, you can have a master's of therapy, but I think a psychologist does have to be a doctor, like a PhD doctor. Um,
Uh,
I could be wrong on that.
right,
The person I
but
see now is not a doctor. She is just a therapist. But
mhm,
either way, the
right,
psychiatrist is the one who can write prescriptions
yeah,
and is
a medical
often
doctor.
using those
Yeah,
prescriptions to help you with whatever you're struggling with. So I saw a psychiatrist and they prescribed me because they couldn't diagnose me, right? They couldn't diagnose me or were unwilling to or wanted me to go through, you have to go through the different channels of like, you need to see a therapist or a psychologist to actually get a diagnosis. And then a psychiatrist can provide medical,
medication.
pharmaceutical treatments.
Right.
So they did not want to give me a stimulant, right? There are multiple ways to treat ADHD, including non-pharmaceutical things. They did not want to give me a stimulant for a variety of reasons, including a lack of diagnosis. They don't want to just be handing out Adderall, Ritalin. Those are stimulants. They put me on something called Strattera, which actually does something to block um, block some other hormones coming through. Not essentially ADHD is a lack of dopamine
Mhm.
regulation and a lack of dopamine production. But Strattera works. I think it's sort of used as an antidepressant in a lot of scenarios as well, and a lot of things like that. I took that for a little while. I was managing
Mhm.
my doses on that, seeing a psychiatrist, but the checkups were just like, "How's the medicine working?
Right.
Okay, how's medicine working?" And getting a full on evaluation on ADHD, like there are a lot of places around me. I don't live in a big metropolitan area like you. I have to go 45 minutes away to West Palm Beach to approach that. And anything in my county was going to be $700 out of pocket. Most of these places weren't working with insurance that
Mhm.
could give me that evaluation. And eventually I just stopped taking the medication because it wasn't really helping me with what I needed. And I didn't have a diagnosis. And so I'm like kind of sitting there between a rock and a hard place. And that led me to a therapist, a psychologist, I believe. And she was this septuagenarian woman, maybe octogenarian woman. I go into her office, which is basically this abandoned floor in this office building. I go in her office. She sits down, talks to me. I explain all my problems, and she goes, "Yeah, sounds like you may have ADHD, and I can tell you right now what I'll tell all my clients. The cure is going to be you need to get a juicer, you need to adopt a vegan lifestyle, and you need to go 100% plant based on everything." I was like, "That's interesting. Okay." I walked out. Like she was the first thing that had come up under my insurance as like close by, available, could make an online
Yeah.
appointment, all the convenience. So I wouldn't just like make it as easy as possible so I could go ahead and get it done with inside of 10 minutes because I knew if I left it, I would leave it for months. But I
Mhm.
walked out of that office, I checked her like Google reviews and she had 1 star. And like everybody that went to her, she was like, "Get a juicer, go on a vegan diet. That's the solution. Like I've been doing this a long time and that's what you need to do." And I'm like, yes, I think there are ways that you can eat a better diet. Maybe, different foods have different effects on you. I'm not here to go through that science. Yes, that can
Sure.
have an effect. I don't think that's the end all be all of treating any
Right.
neurodivergent things. That led me to my current therapist who has 5 stars on Google. She's fantastic, and I've been seeing her for almost a year. And just a couple months ago, she actually, after all our conversations, officially did diagnose me. Not because she couldn't diagnose me before with ADHD, but just because we never really crossed the threshold. Because to this day, after I got off that Strattera, um, I am not taking any medication for it. I'm trying to use a lot of
Mhm.
other habits and tools to manage it. I am still considering medication, but yeah, that's been my own personal journey is like
Mhm.
I went into it like, hey, something kind of feels off. I feel like I check a lot of these boxes. Am I making this up or is this a real thing? And so I'm not telling everybody to go out there and try and like diagnose a problem.
No.
But going and talking to someone, they may be able to help you say, okay, this feeling that you're having, maybe it is depression. Maybe it is ADHD. Maybe it is a number of other things that, yeah, you can put a label on. And no, you don't necessarily, that doesn't mean, okay, now you got to start taking antidepressants or now you got to start taking stimulants to treat your ADHD, all that stuff. But talking to someone and not feeling like you're alone or wondering, like it can help you live a better life, or at least take a weight off your shoulders a little bit sometimes.
Yeah. No, and that's great to hear. Just like the full path in which you got from point A to, based on everything you said, point R, maybe
Whatever.
you're at right now.
Yeah, who knows?
And, but as you know, like we talked about basketball, we went right into this. We didn't really talk about our kids, and this is working on the dad pod. But if you want to be, to me, if you want to be a good dad, you do have to prioritize your own health, whether that be mental health, physical health. We talked a couple episodes ago about prioritizing time for yourself, and that's all part of wellness. And
yeah, I think that fits in really well with mental health, is finding that time for yourself.
Absolutely. And be okay and generous with yourself about talking about your problems. I actually told my therapist before we started recording that one of the reasons I wanted to do this was an extra layer of, I guess, like just another therapeutic avenue. And actually, Alex, you and I are in a group chat with some other friends, and one of them told us the other day that just listening to our daycare episode was very therapeutic for him because he felt like he was screaming into a void, and then he heard our episode and was like, "Oh, great, I'm not alone." So this whole experience is actually part of mine and Alex's, or at least mine, mental health journey. In that, I feel like since I've started recording with you, man, that I feel like I've been a better dad. I still have my bad moments, and I still raise my voice when I wish I shouldn't, which we talked about on a previous episode in wins and losses. And I'm still not fully, the dad I want to be, but I know that talking with you and taking the time to do a little bit of pre-episode research and really sitting down and thinking about stuff I want to talk about with you has been really therapeutic. And
amen to that.
Yeah.
Well, and I agree with that 100%, that it makes me think about, I'm almost working on trying to avoid as many losses. Like it feels like a win when I'm struggling to come up with a loss sometimes for our wins and losses segments. But I think for the dads out there, we talk specifically a lot about our therapy journeys as part of our mental health. And I think it's definitely something that everybody listening to this should explore. If you're not going to therapy, explore it. And by explore it, I don't mean jump right in with 2 feet. Look at how much it's going to cost you. Look at who's available. Take your time. The other things I would say, based on my experience and other people's experience, if you find yourself with a therapist that is not meeting your needs, or you don't feel recharged, like, do not feel obligated to stay with them, just like you wouldn't stay with a bad doctor in any other field. Like, don't feel obligated to stay with a bad therapist. But if you're not going to therapy, there are a ton of other things, as Ethan mentioned. Showing up for your kids consistently with your best effort requires you being at your best as much as humanly possible. And so one hurdle that I had with going to therapy is the time commitment.
Yeah.
We talked about taking time for ourselves. We both struggle with the idea of spending money on ourselves. So one, I'm spending money to make myself better mentally, but I'm also spending the time, right? And luckily I am afforded the opportunity, as someone who is self-employed, to have the ability to go to a biweekly appointment in the middle of a weekday and not have severe repercussions from that. And it's close by. But I think if you're a dad who is not taking that time 5 minutes, 15 minutes, whatever, that time taken to meditate, to read a book, to go for a walk with calming music on, something that will recharge you mentally, will pay so many more dividends than pushing through because you don't have the time, right? It can tear you down so much. And when you take that time for yourself to mentally take care of yourself, you'll find yourself. I found myself, you mentioned it, that you were immediately seeing those dividends. I started seeing those dividends in how I showed up for my kids as well, by taking different strategies for my mental health.
Absolutely. And, another way to kind of conceptualize mental health before we wrap up is, this. I am not from Missouri, but I'm a big fan of their former Secretary of State, Jason Kander. He's someone I really look up to. He's got a couple books. His most recent is about his own mental health journey. I'm just going to plug it. It's called Invisible Storm. I listened to it on Audible. It was excellent. But what his therapist told him, and I want to repeat to all of you, is that just like any other kind of getting into shape, whether it be physical, getting into mental shape is also just like a muscle. You can't just go to therapy once and expect that you're going to be better, or you can't just go on one walk. You can't just listen to one song music one time. Like, you have to be repetitive and get your mind right, the same way in which, like, you can't do one push-up. You got to do push-ups every day. You can't go jogging once. You've got to do, or not every day, but you got to come back and you got to get to it.
Right. Right.
So you think if you're having trouble, whether you are still, as Alex touched on earlier, 5 years ago, where it's not manly to go to therapy, it is really manly to work out, right? So think of it as a workout. Think of it as you are trying to improve the physical shape of your mind, whether that be therapy, whether that be going for a walk, listening to music, whether that just be anything you want. You got to find the time for you. It's got to be regular and it's got to be repetitive. That is the only thing I would push from this episode as my own challenge to you, the listener.
I would also say be honest with yourself on top of that, because I think there are a lot of, we talked about the stigmas around men going to therapy as an unmanly thing for them to do. And I think you have to be honest with yourself. Like, I spent a long period of my life, I'm 34 years old. I didn't get diagnosed with ADHD until I was 34 years old. I spent a long period of my life, sort of thinking that, again, I was not bouncing off the walls. I didn't get extra time added to tests. In fact, I was the exact opposite. I was usually the first person to hand it in, because I walked in and I was like, I know it or I don't, and staring at it's not going to change that. But there were a lot of things that I struggled with that I didn't have to struggle with, because I wasn't asking the right questions or getting help in the right ways. And so I think, even if you don't realize, I think there's two things: that you could not realize that you're having a problem. You could also not realize you're struggling sometimes until you get on the other side of it. And you're like, oh my God, that was so much harder than I needed it to be. That was so much harder. Whatever that thing is, whether that's parenting, whether that's finding motivation at your job, whatever it is, sometimes you get to the other side and you're like, wow, I really made my life harder just because I didn't want to do something different or step out of my comfort zone or go talk to a complete stranger. I have a question for you. Yeah. So with your therapy experience, I don't want to get into the nitty gritty personal things you've talked about, but I will say this: I enjoy talking to my therapist. It is not for me like a lay down on the couch and cry and blame my parents kind of thing, like the stereotypical thing you hear about. That's not your experience, right?
No, I mean, I will say
that's okay, but
no, I do sit on my couch just so that I'm not sitting on at my desk as if I'm working. I try to create that physical separation, even though it is virtual. every once in a while, if I feel like holding my computer on my lap, or my iPad, I will lie down. But honestly, you and I have very different therapists. I've told you there have been times I've been thinking about changing therapists,
Mm-hmm.
but I found something that like worked for us. My issue is it involves me being a little more proactive and coming with a list of things that I want to talk about, and just having that person there who is dedicated to me to listen to me and then
Mm-hmm.
respond has been really helpful to me
Right.
because I am taking the time to get things off my chest, knowing that there's not going to be like my wife coming in with her own agenda into a conversation, or you,
Sure.
or any of our other friends, where he's just there to listen to me, and uh, if he can offer a different perspective that helps me, great. And
He's not a
sometimes it's just nice,
stakeholder.
right? Yeah. And sometimes I wish I had a therapist that was a little more constructive in that, like they gave me homework and some other stuff. But it's so far this has been working, and honestly, the I think therapy with him and doing this podcast with you has been a um, solid conversation. And of course, I will say there are times that I do mess up as a dad, or times that my wife is also struggling, and she follows a lot more of the parenting social media accounts than me, and like Big Little
Yeah.
Feelings, and some of the other ones where I know that if she sends me a link from them, that it's paramount and important that I look at it, whether it's her kind of sharing what she's feeling, or if
Yeah.
it's her subtle way of being like, do this better.
Yeah.
So I will say, the therapy journey isn't always you and a therapist. It isn't always the therapist telling you what to do. Sometimes
No.
the point is you have to take control of your own mental health journey. And
Yeah.
um, and also, just we touched on it briefly, but on this, with regard to seeing a professional, we know that it can be cost prohibitive for a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people. Not a lot of therapists. Not all therapists take insurance, and not all of them take your insurance.
Sure.
Most importantly, so we do not want to be insensitive to anybody who
Sure.
thinks that we're just able to afford it. I still have a copay. Mine's manageable. Um,
I, I
same
will.
with Alex.
I will say this though, on that note, right? Like, so I think there are ways we've talked about therapists, and obviously I've mentioned there are other things. There is actually a middle area, and I know of such a group that I've never been to. It was something I considered before going to therapy, and therapy sort of taken the place. But one thing you can always look into is sometimes there are men's groups or dads groups that are there to help you talk through your problems that are not a therapist and they're not a paid thing, right? And I know there was one pre-pandemic in my area that was like dads getting together. It was at a therapy office. The wife of the guy who led it was a therapist, but he wasn't. And just there to talk through problems and sort of have that sounding board. And what it sounded like to me, and this is not to cast judgment or it's not a joke or anything like that, it sounded like an AA meeting, but for dads, where you got up and you talked about your feelings and you had a support group and it was free to
Mm-hmm.
go to. And
Yeah.
so it was not something that was like super Googleable, but if you have other male friends and you want to get together, like, or maybe it's not friends, look for something like that too. Look for a group where you can talk about it in sort of the vein of like, this is a safe space. And what
Mm-hmm.
happens in this room, what's said in this room, doesn't leave this room. And that can be another option to, because talking to somebody really helps, even if they're not necessarily a trained professional. So
Yeah.
definitely look for those kind of outlets too.
Absolutely. And just to offer one more outlet before we sign off, keep in mind that we are on social media. We do have an email address.
Yes.
If you want to talk to us, we will
Mm-hmm.
absolutely talk back to you. That's why we're doing this. We are
Yeah.
trying to promote dads talking to other dads about being a dad, not necessarily about your kids, but about being a dad. This is everything we talk about on this show is stuff that we wish other people would talk to us about. So we're just taking the initiative to do it ourselves.
Yeah, for sure. So if you're struggling with something, reach out to us. As we say in sort of our show description, a lot of stuff we don't have all the answers, but sometimes that's a good thing, because I think we probably spend a lot of our lives telling people our problems and they're just trying to solve them for us, and sometimes we just need somebody to listen. So if you need somebody to listen, if we have advice, we'll share it, or we can point you in the right direction of where you might be able to look for it. When we're doing the show notes for this one, we'll also try to include some resources on, how you can find different things. I want to do a little more offline research on this to give you guys some resources that, aren't necessarily just going on your insurance site and finding a psychologist or a psychiatrist or therapist, because there are resources out there, but they're not always as easy to find as I wish they would be.
Couldn't agree more. Well, I'm actually, my computer's only got 10% battery left, so I think I'm just gonna force us to end it.
A mental recharge.
Yeah, exactly. So, for Alex, I'm Ethan. Thanks so much for tuning in and working on the Dad Pod with us. We'll see you next time.
Or should have picked Scoot.
Bye.
Thanks for working on the Dad Pod with us. Any resources that we mentioned during the show will be in the show notes. If you have questions, thoughts, or just want to talk with us, the best place is in the comments on YouTube. We're on YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram at Working on the Dad Pod, and on Twitter at Working on Dad Pod. Following and subscribing is always appreciated. Please rate and review us. That helps get the show to new people. And if you know a dad who would enjoy our show, sharing with them is a huge help to them and us. Have a great week.